Hello to everyone. I'm happy to hear the names of my students on my lecture today. So today we plan to discuss the question together with the students of group number 528 for English speaking students. Actually, they all have to speak in English and respectively listen to the lectures in English. But because of the unequal English level of all students, time to time we need to interpret the topics in three languages, in English, in Azerbaijani, and in Russian as well. Okay, so welcome to my lecture. The question for today is inflation. So we have to understand the meaning of this economic notion and try to define what is that. Then perhaps we need to discuss the major causes of inflation and the types of inflation. Then, because inflation is very strong and hard economic event, it's necessary to understand the expected effects of inflation, the consequences, negative, positives. Then the next step that we have to clarify during the lecture is how to control. What are the major control measures for inflation? Okay, so let's start. Firstly, we have to talk about the inflation as a definition. Well, so you can face different approaches to the inflation in economic theory, but basically we have to recognize two facts. Firstly, well, inflation majorly is classified as economists the situation when the prices, the price level of majority of goods and services go up. At the same time, this process happens immediately with the declining in the purchasing power of the money. Okay, so look, you see on this slide the different approaches of different scientists to inflation. That's the two sentences you see on the slide, and the author first is Gregory, and the second one is Colburn. That's a different scientists, economists. So inflation, the first approach, is an increase in the quantity of purchasing power. So in the second approach, inflation in the stage of too much money chasing too few goods. By me, the second approach is more appropriate because we can see two typical issues for inflation. From one side, inflation implies increase in the prices of goods and services. On the other side, it means that if we have some paper money in our hands, we can buy too few number of goods. Well, how we have to interpret what is the economic meaning of inflation? So basically, inflation we can consider as a global process, global phenomenon, and it takes place because of extremely great increase in the prices of goods and services from one side, as I mentioned before, and this process is resulting in the decline of the purchasing value of money. So the second content of inflation, the meaning of the second approach means that the rate at which the general price level for different goods, for different commodities, services is rising, and as a result, as a consequence, the purchasing power of money, of paper money, goes down. It's failing. Well, the next, so of course, we have to recognize that unfortunately, inflation is not the same every time. And when we discuss the price increase, we have to emphasize that majorly we imply that this process is long term. Because time to time, the increase in the prices may happen because of changing in the quality of goods and services, because of the different problems associated with getting the necessary raw materials for the producers. Then it may be caused by the change in the demand and supply balance equilibrium between demand and supply, and the sharp increase in demand for some goods and services. And that's why time to time, increasing the prices of some goods is a normal process in the market, but it doesn't mean inflation. So we say that we are faced with inflation when overall price level goes up. Well, now, something about the types of inflation. So you can see the different division, different classification of inflation in different textbooks, but majorly we can find out some similarities in classification of the inflation. And the key types of inflation we have to consider, firstly, creeping inflation, walking or trotting inflation, running inflation, galloping inflation, and hyperinflation. So the creeping inflation implies that the annual average rate of inflation is very slow. It fluctuates between 2-3 percentages. So that's why this inflation sometimes is considered by economists like normal and even positive inflation, because creates some internal incentives for producers to increase supply, to increase production. Walking and trotting inflation, that's the type of inflation when the rate of inflation changes from 5 to 10%, and time to time it may fluctuate, and from 5% and 7% and 10% and again 5%. So that's why we said it's walking inflation, unstable. Running inflation, it means that the government and all economic agents have to think about some dangerous processes that may happen, because running inflation implies that the velocity, the speed of inflation goes up. It's very fast inflation. And the rate of inflation may fluctuate from 20%, 15% till 30%. Galloping per year, of course. The galloping inflation, it means the very fast inflation. And the final is very hard situation with price level is hyperinflation, when the annual rate of inflation may exceed 1,000%, even more. Well, of course, we have to talk about the theories and the causes of inflation. But before that, I would like to talk about the quantitative measurement of inflation rate. So how to count inflation? Because the inflation is a percentage indicator and is among the major macroeconomic indicators. So we have to clarify the major quantitative tool, how to determine exactly the percentage rate of inflation. So inflation rate we can count in terms of price indexes. Well, you know that there are different price indexes. As minimum, we use three: the consumer price index, producer price index, and GDP, or in some economic literature, you may find a G&P deflator. So by using these three different price indexes, you may count inflation rate. Let's use the CPI, Consumer Price Index. So how to count inflation rate? Inflation rate is the ratio between the price index of current year and price index of previous year or base year divided by the price index of base year. And the result of the ratio we have to multiply by 100% in order to get the percentage indicator for inflation rate. Well, later I'll offer you another presentation in order to clarify the calculating procedure of the inflation rate. Now go to theories and the causes of inflation. So normally, the main cause of inflation is increase in demand of goods and services, and at the same time, the parallel happened slight decrease in the supply of the goods and services. So any disequilibrium among the supply and demand of the goods, basically increased demand and decreased supply, will immediately lead to the very strong inflation. In economic theory, we imply in terms of the causes of inflation, we discuss two types of inflation, or two theories that try to explain the process of burning inflation. So the first one is demand pull inflation, and the second one is cost push inflation. By the way, sometimes demand pull inflation is called like demand side inflation, and the cost push inflation, the economists frequently call it supply side inflation. So now let's consider separately each of these theories that try to explain the causes of inflation. Okay, first one is demand pull inflation or demand side inflation. So you can see very clear scheme and the graphical representation of the situation. I don't know what do you think about that, but by me, if we have some graph, it's easy to understand the economic procedure. So demand pull inflation, you can see on the scheme, is associated with increase in aggregate demand. So we have two demand curves, that's the blue colored on your scheme, and one supply curve, or that's more correct, aggregate supply curve, associated with red colored line on your scheme. Look, what do we see? We see the excess aggregate demand in economy because AD2 is associated with greater demand than the previous AD1 curve. And at the same time, the stable, unchanged aggregate supply curve. So as a result, we have two intersection points. The first one is associated with price level P1 that is significantly lower than the new equilibrium price P2. Look, the amount of output goes up at the same time, the amount of the level of price also increases. So businesses respond to high demand by raising prices in order to increase their profit margin because they cannot keep pace immediately to the sharply increased demand, and that's why they want to benefit from this situation, to gain from this situation by rising prices. Now go to the second time, supply side inflation theory or cost push inflation. Well, now you also see the graphical representation of this situation. So we have to understand that this process normally occurs when the production costs or business operation costs are increasing. Well, what are the major factors that may cause the increase in the production costs? Well, you see on this slide three major reasons. First one is the increase in the wages and wage level. That's a compensation for employees that the businesses have to do. The second one is a significant increase in cost of the raw materials when the resources, production resources and the major raw materials became more expensive. And this process causes a significant increase in the production costs of the business. And The third reason is also associated with increasing production costs, but is caused by the increase of the prices of some imported components necessary for production process. Well, in turn, this situation normally is associated with a slightly lower supply curve. In the picture on the slide, you see the red colored aggregate supply curve. That is, that moves to the left-hand side, and it means that probably we see the decrease in aggregate amount of supply of the goods and services. But at the same time, the level of aggregate demand doesn't change. What is the normal result of this situation? Of course, the new equilibrium. And this new equilibrium is because is associated with lower production, and in turn it means lower supply of goods and services. So the situation will immediately cause a significant increase in the overall price level of the goods. That's why the price level moves from PL1 level to PL2. I mean, PL1 is at the blue colored level. It's lower than the upper new increased price level PL in red color. So this is briefly the content of the cost push inflation theory. Now let's go to the effects of inflation. By the way, in general, when we discuss the reasons or the causes of inflation, we try to classify them in two directions. The first one, demand side or demand pull inflation, and the second one is cost push or so-called supply side reasons of inflation. But we have to add the other specific moments that may cause and frequently are they actually perform very clear reasons for the increasing the price level. One aspect is the significant budget deficit of the government. The other one, as a reason, at the cause of inflation, we can discuss the extremely great number of large-scale investments in the country. The other one may be the disbalance or disequilibrium among the real wage rate and real labor productivity. The other one is some weaknesses in monetary policy of the government, and especially in the tax policy of the government, because the high taxes frequently discourage the producers to work more, to produce more goods and services. They try to lower production and compensate the increased tax rates by the high prices of the goods and services. The other one, the other reason of inflation also may be the very strong monopolization of the industries and the national economy as a whole. The one more, as a reason of inflation also, we can discuss the extremely great degree of militarization of the national economy. And of course, we cannot ignore the external economic effects of the national economy that we frequently may cause the domestic increase in prices. Well, now go back to effects of inflation. Well, so there are a lot of different effects of inflation, and that effect depends also on the velocity of the speed of inflation, and of course on specifics and nature of national economy. So there are several, you see these several possible effects. The first one is rising prices of inputs. Then The second reason that the inflation may lower national saving. Look, what about the first? How can the inflation rise the prices of inputs? You know, when domestically the price level goes up, it means that the products, imported goods and services now become more expensive for the customers than before. At the same time, increasing the price level discourages people to save more because they think about money like they see that the paper money loses the purchasing power and they try to spend immediately. So because it doesn't make any sense to save money with very low purchasing power. The other one, a redistribution of income and wealth. Well, you know that among the major economic functions of the government is redistribution of income and wealth, because it's very important for every national economy in order to avoid some negative social processes in the community. That's why the government, by means of transfer payments, tries to reallocate, redistribute the income from the extremely wealthy members of community to the people with a little poor incomes. But when the prices go up very fast, this process actually is not so efficient because the paper money shows very low purchasing power from hour to hour, from day to day, and result it doesn't make any sense to use the transfer payments in order to support the people with poor incomes. Sometimes very strong inflation, especially if either the galloping or hyperinflation and even the running inflation frequently, they may cause collapse of monetary system. It means that the banking system and the banking system actually cannot develop their normal functioning because they always have to think about the interest rates in terms of credits, in terms of deposits, and this balance, so this equilibrium between the amount of credits and savings in hands of the banks frequently cause very negative situation. Well, then the inflation may impact the socially and politically the community as a whole. That discourage investment and saving because no one thinks about the investment because that's very unstable situation, and the money, the purchasing power of money declines from hour to hour. So it doesn't make any sense to invest money in some business or in some national economy. The same situation occurs with savings. The people try immediately convert paper money into real goods because they are not sure that tomorrow the purchasing power of money will be higher than today. And of course, in very deep collaboration with collapse of monetary system, the banks try to offer higher interest rates because they cannot keep pace with the increased prices, and every time they have to adapt their interest rates to the new price level. As a result, the income tax rates also goes up. Well, that's majorly the negative effects of inflation. How to change the situation, how we can control the measure. So what are the major control ways to, basically that's the monetary policy. So I don't want to discuss this moment in very deep details because probably it will be the separate question for our lecture. That's why you have just to know that monetary policy implies the changing in the financial policy of respective state financial institutions. The other one also concerns the fiscal measures. Fiscal measures basically implies the manipulation or just mobility of the taxes in order to form the new incentives for the entrepreneurs, for the businesses, to encourage them to produce more goods and services in order to support the paper money with a real amount of goods and services. Well, the other measures, lots interesting, because any negative situation that may occur associated with inflation, the very strong and real and direct way to leave this situation is just to increase production. Nothing more. So you have to do everything to increase the domestic production of goods and services to support your paper money that the government printed in order to avoid some macroeconomic instability, to support the paper money with real production. And on the way to reach this target, the government and the entrepreneurs and the all businessmen have to think about the rational wage policy. The wage level shouldn't be higher than the real labor productivity. And the third very realistic and very efficient way is to realize the reasonable price control in order to avoid the new wave of inflation. Okay, so that's one actually an important things that you have to know about the inflation. So let's go back through all the slides in order to revise the key points. So firstly, we have to understand the major definitions of the inflation. So we can talk about the as minimum two different approaches to definition of inflation. Then we have to be informed about the major types of inflation. Then we have to know how to calculate the inflation rate. Then the major causes of inflation, the classification of theories that try to explain the causes of inflation. I mean, demand pull or demand side inflation, and cost push or cost or supply side of inflation. Then the graphical representations of the two approaches, I mean, demand pull inflation, associated with increased aggregate demand and stable supply, and cost push inflation that explains the inflation rate in terms of lower aggregate supply and stable aggregate demand. And the effects of inflation, consequences, economic consequences of inflation. Then the control, how can we control the situation? Firstly, my major two tools on the hand of the government, it's a monetary policy and the fiscal measures. But on the other side, the more realistic approach in order to in order to avoid the inflation is increased production, rational wage policy, and price control. Okay, that's all actually with this presentation. I see that we have several minutes to the end of my lecture, but I would like to go to the one more presentation. Let me know, do we have several minutes, sorry. Well, sometime. Okay. So let it be next time, because I see that we don't have 3 minutes. Well, everyone have a good day. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer your questions. If not, please have a good day. See you next week. Bye bye.